You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Welcome to the Choose FI Radio podcast. Today I have an episode for you that frankly is different than anything that we've done up to this point, and I think it is going to bring so much value to your life. The way I want to start is by telling you all the things that this show is not going to be. This is not the story of CarLotz, a car dealership that is absolutely on the verge of blowing up nationwide. This is not the story of how to become a Fortune 500 company. But what this is what it looks like to design your future. And this specifically is a story of Will, who walked away from a lucrative financial career and made the choice to pursue a startup. This is the story of how an individual in the FI community was willing to take what honestly is a calculated risk and is willing to put in the long hours in order to have total control over his schedule. And what I want you to come away with as you listen to this episode, don't focus on the big picture. Don't focus on the final product. Focus on the steps. Focus on these individual inflection points that Will had to deal with and face and come up with solutions for. And you will very quickly understand why his business is seeing the success that it's seen. And more importantly, you're going to be able to take the problems and the solutions that we talk about in this episode, and you're going to be able to apply it to your own business down the road. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing well. Yeah, that was quite an intro, that's for sure. It's interesting because Will and Will's story are all of those things. To your point, you could focus on, wow, Will is the co-founder of a company that is blowing up, that could be a Fortune 500 company one day. It's not inconceivable. That has raised millions of dollars in venture capital and is just on this verge of this huge inflection point. That would be great. That would be a great takeaway. But I think more importantly is to look at Will's journey and say, wow, where were these points in his life where he made a risk, he made a calculated gamble, and he decided to further his talent stack, further his set of skills, and take a chance that could be something absolutely enormous. I think it's going to be a fascinating story. So with that, Will, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I have listened to every episode and learned so much from you guys and your guests. It's a real thrill to be on the other side to see how the sausage is made.
Well, glad to be included. So, Will, we know you through Choose FI and through our Richmond local group, and you've really become a wonderful friend over the last year. But what became quickly apparent is that your story is absolutely fascinating. And I would love to hear, I believe you grew up in Richmond and went to UVA and then went to Harvard Business School. And I'm curious, in light of that, was it always entrepreneurship for you, or is this something that you fell into?
It was really something I fell into based on my early career experiences. I did have exposure to the business world going way back to my early days. My grandfather was somebody who I really admired. He was in the retail business. He was always dressed super sharply. On occasion, he would end up in the local newspaper, which, as a 7-year-old is just the coolest thing ever. And he would send me annual reports from companies that he was invested in. Even as a 10-year-old, I would tear through those glossy annual reports. And my favorite part of it was going back to the proxy statements and seeing how much the CEO and the CFO and the COO made in terms of total compensation. So, those are things that I was doing early on, but it really wasn't something that drove me to pursue a particular degree or to drive me to UVA and Harvard Business School in particular. I have a degree in finance, and I spent the first several years of my career in investment banking and private equity, where we helped advise and invest in middle market businesses going through a sale process. I had an awesome experience there, learned a ton, but the work was largely intellectual And what I admired most and was really drawn to was the work done by the management teams of the companies that we worked with. The folks who were really in the driver's seat of building a business, implementing growth strategies, creating an attractive environment for their employees, making a genuine impact on their customers and their local communities and economies. And I just decided that is what I wanted to do with my life. The problem was I didn't have an idea for a business and really no idea what it would actually be like to start one. Where do you even begin? So I decided to go back to school. I pursued an MBA at Harvard Business School, and I used that time to figure out how I could make the transition. I ended up joining a tech company in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I reported to the founder and got to see firsthand the challenges that I might one day face as a business owner. And that really emboldened me to take the next step of actually starting my own company.
There was something you said there that I wanted to go back to. I didn't have an idea. And that's something that's really, it resonates with me, because one of the things that, as someone that hasn't gone to our Harvard Business School and as someone that was looking at entrepreneurship from the outside, my one thought was that most businesses that are startups fail. Then right behind that was, I don't have any good ideas. What is your perspective on that on the outside looking in and then now?
Yeah, I think for me, the idea itself wasn't as important as the concept of building a business, any business. And the original idea for CarLotz actually was not my own. I had reconnected while I was down in Raleigh working for this technology company. I had kept in touch with a former colleague who's now one of my co-founders, Michael Bohr. He was a guy that I always looked up to. We started at our investment banking jobs the same day, but he was just out of business school. So I basically reported to him on a couple of transactions. We had a great working experience together. And he was someone that I believed would go on to do something special with his life and his career. And I just felt like this is a guy I need to keep in touch with. So I left that job, moved to New York City, moved to Boston to pursue my MBA, down to Raleigh to work for this technology company, and just kind of kept in touch with Mike because I was interested to know, would he ever end up going off on his own and doing something? And it would be a lot of fun to work with him. At one point, he actually did decide to leave his job. I called him up and said, hey, what are you planning to do? He had a couple of business ideas. I said, well, tell me about them. And the first couple, I really didn't think were particularly compelling, but the idea for CarLotz and this consignment store for cars really resonated with me. I had just had an awkward experience trying to buy a car off Craigslist. I met the seller in a credit union parking lot. His kid was asleep in the back seat while we went on the test drive. I turned the car around in a parking lot to get back to the credit union and bottomed out his car. It was just totally awkward. By the end of it, I just wanted to walk away and never see the guy again. And he probably felt the same way. So I ended up buying a new car, which was not a particularly pleasant experience either. So even though I'm not really a car guy, I just thought it would be fun as a consumer who is intimidated by the car buying and selling process to come up with a business model that helped solve some of my own insecurities and frustrations. So even though it wasn't my original idea, even though I'm not really that interested in the car industry overall, it was something that really resonated with me and gave me an opportunity to do the thing that I really wanted to do, which was build a business, do it with people who I really admired and enjoyed working with, and to do it in my hometown of Richmond, no less. It was just an opportunity I couldn't pass up.
In your story description, you described that when you had that early career job as an investment banker, you obviously were in this lucrative career, something that people consider a huge success. But in that, you looked at these business owners and the managers and said, wow, I think that's the side that I want to be on. That's what might light me up. I'm curious if there were any particular instances or attributes that you saw in those owners and managers, and what really led you to say, hey, maybe entrepreneurship is for me?
Yeah, I was fortunate to get exposure to just some really remarkable people, and not just the folks, at the firms where I worked who were incredibly smart and driven, but the managers that we worked with. So we would advise companies who were going through a sale process. And one part of that process would be to meet with potential private equity firms or other investors that might purchase the company. We would go through what's called a management presentation, walk through the whole history of the business, the growth opportunities ahead, and do a tour of the facility. And through those, I got to see the actual operation. For example, there's a company in New Hampshire, a manufacturing company. They make medical devices. To go with the CEO and the COO out onto the manufacturing floor and watch their manufacturing employees in action and see the reaction that those employees had to those managers as they were walking the floor, mutual respect and admiration for one another. The CEO was quite emotional when he would talk about some of his employees and how important he viewed his role as creating an environment where his team could succeed and make the most of themselves in their career. And that was the type of impact at really a granular level, a one-on-one employee to employer level that I found, profound and compelling, and really felt the urge to kind of be in that position and try to have that same type of impact on someone.
One of the things that strikes me is that you didn't grow up immersed in this FI conversation, just like me and Brad. And you came out like me with a lot of student loan debt. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on finances. What was your worldview about finances in the early days before you discovered the FI community?
I was always pretty frugal. I think I'm more like Brad than I am Jonathan in terms of my kind of historical spending. I ended up, after discovering FI, doing the your money or your life process of kind of evaluating, your net worth against your earnings history and calculating your savings rate. And, ultimately I was in that kind of 50% range. And I think it really is just at an early age, I was highly frugal. I didn't like to spend money almost to a fault, socially when you're in college and you're going out for drinks and you feel like the lame guy that doesn't want to go out and spend money and buy a round of drinks, and your friends are kind of making fun of you. But it really wasn't with a specific goal of financial independence in mind. It was just I never liked to spend money. So I think that has framed my overall experience with money, but also why I'm so attracted to the FI movement is that it has really put kind of the way that I've interacted with money over the years into perspective. It's given me a real why behind the actions that I'm taking, because I'm now actually working towards a specific financial objective as opposed to just operating the way I've always operated.
You're in a great field. You're in a very highly compensated field. Now, a lot of hours are required for investment banking, but if you had just stayed on that track with your frugal tendencies, you would have reached FI, I would imagine, in roughly 10 years. Stepping outside of that and pursuing entrepreneurship and building this business from scratch, financially at face value, it could be a real setback. What was that like, and how did you, sell that to your wife, to your parents, to your family? What was that conversation like?
It was tough. I had a job I loved. I'd have to be apart from my wife since she planned to stay in Raleigh until I got the business off the ground, largely from a financial perspective. It was a huge step back financially. I knew I was going to take a massive pay cut, like to zero. I was making a solid income. That opportunity cost was significant. Plus, I did have 6 figures of student loan debt after getting my MBA. And I knew that when we launched the company, I needed to be all in on the business. I did not want to be constantly stressed out about the financial situation and questioning why I made this horrible financial decision. We decided, as I mentioned, that my wife should stay in Raleigh until I got the business off the ground because she had a good job and income there. I lived with my parents so that we could avoid paying double rent. We cut out a whole bunch of other expenses and ultimately calculated that we still had about 2 years of runway where I could make zero income before we burned through our savings, which I felt was ample time to figure out if we were onto something.
Well, there's a lot there, certainly. So there are these points where you didn't make the obvious choice. Did you always know, just to go back to business school real quick, did you go immediately from undergrad into business school? And if not, that's a pretty big undertaking, obviously, in terms of years and in terms of dollars. Was that something that you really thought through? Like, you're a frugal guy, as you described. That's a big decision. Talk me through that real quick.
Yeah, financially pursuing the MBA was a tough one, but coming out of undergrad, I did not go straight through to business school. I spent 4 years working, and I was in investment banking and private equity, which generally pay very high incomes. So as a 22-year-old making close to six-figure salary, I did it actually in my hometown, and I was working about 100 hours a week. So I didn't have much of a social life. So I wasn't spending any money. I decided to live with my parents because I was never home. So I saved probably 80+% of my income for those first couple of years. When I moved up to New York, the expenses obviously increased significantly since it's a high cost of living area, but I still had a really solid income and wasn't spending a lot of money. So throughout those 4 years, I had actually saved a significant amount of money. And that made the decision to pursue my MBA a lot easier to stomach financially, because I knew that I could fairly quickly pay off the debt that I had incurred with my savings.
Do you think going back, and this was before you found the FI community, do you think if you put yourself back in your shoes of MBA program minus 6 months, or, application minus 6 months, and you're at a 80% savings rate, and obviously a little lower, certainly when you're in New York, but let's say still a significant savings rate, do you think you would have pursued your MBA, or would you have said, hey, I can reach FI in 4 years on a 100K plus salary and an 80% savings rate? Have you ever thought about that?
I have thought about it, because the FI community or this pursuit of FI has really put all of my historical decisions into perspective. I really have no regrets because I'm happy with where I am today. But if I were to rewind the clock 10 years and be pursuing FI at that moment, I doubt I would have made the decision to pursue my MBA because of the high income that I was making and the significant savings that I had. If FI were my sole objective, absolutely the right decision would have been to continue down the path that I was on. But ultimately, I am much more interested in building my life resume than I am about, building a career resume or pursuing FI exclusively. I think, like most people in the FI community, I'm more interested in pursuing ventures that enrich my life than I am about things that just enrich my career and look good on a resume. So the decision for me to move to Boston and spend 2 years pursuing my MBA, where I believed I would not only learn a lot, but meet some really interesting people, get exposure to a lot of different backgrounds and career pursuits that might help me decide ultimately what type of business I wanted to start. I felt like that was still a good decision just from a life perspective, even though from a pure FI perspective, it probably was not the right move.
If this were a video podcast, I'm sure you would be able to see Brad and my eyes synchronize and raise at the exact same time when you said life resume. What an awesome term. And I'd love to hear you explore that a little bit further. If someone is thinking about building their life resume, taking, I guess the implication is taking the emphasis off of your traditional career resume, what does that look like for you? How would you explain that concept to somebody?
The life resume for me is about pursuing all of my interests, not just my career interest, not just my personal interests, not just my financial interests, but building a life around all those things because they're all important to me and drive value in my life. I think it's largely for me about taking action. I had been thinking about starting a business for such a long time that I didn't want to look back on my life and regret not taking action. Even though most businesses fail, that risk is extraordinarily high. For me, the risk of not taking the leap was greater than the risk of taking it, because from a life perspective, I knew I would learn, I would grow, and ultimately land on my feet.
Yeah, well, that's incredible, because that's exactly the same thought process that I used when I left my corporate job, kind of that backwards looking on life. Hey, when I'm 85 years old someday, will I regret having taken that chance, or will I more regret not having taken that chance? And for me, it was obvious that I would regret not having taken the chance, because when do you get that opportunity in life to step off the path and to really pursue something that you've built? So I think that's really important, especially when in our cases, you could have gone back and been an investment banker or in private equity, and I could have found an accounting job very, very easily, even if our companies failed. So there was no major downside risk. I think that's important, is that if you've built a life where you can just kind of jump back onto the normal path, the normal hamster wheel, then why not give this a shot, right? So I think that's essential. But I wanted to double back to your life resume. As far as like your own personal items, and this is way beyond just your job. Do you chronicle these? Do you catalog them in any way? We had Chris Hutchins from Grove on, as you well know, and he talked about like memorable moments that he has one a month. Do you keep track of your life resume?
I love that you brought up Chris, because I have borrowed that concept, because no, I did not really have any way to track my life resume other than each year I sit down and spend a half a day and set goals for the year. It's personal goals, business goals, financial goals. And so I can look back to those goals and see the progress that I've made and see how many of those I've actually checked off. But in terms of saying, okay, this month I'm going to do this, and this month I'm going to do that to ensure that I'm building and leading the life that I want to live, I never really had a way to do that until hearing Chris's episode.
Yeah, that's something I've actually implemented as well. I was going to talk about it on an upcoming show, but I have taken advantage of the Google ecosystem to help me build this. And I've started connecting Google Photos to Google Sheets to Google Docs, and all of those kind of stamping what I'm doing on a monthly basis. And I'm kind of building this thing out as I go. So it's kind of fresh, but I'm taking action on that one as well.
That's awesome. I'll have to try that.
I wanted to circle back to the space between graduating with your MBA and actually taking the plunge to build this business. Those two did not happen within a day or two. There was a period of time where you were working in the middle. And the reason I bring that up is you highlighted earlier the importance of mentors in your life. And I'd love to hear you go a little bit deeper with that. What role have mentors had on this kind of educational process for you?
Mentors have been extremely important to me in building my career and helping guide the decisions that I've made. When I was going back to college, I really didn't know what direction I wanted to take my career. I knew I wanted to pursue something around business, but there's so many paths that you can go down. I spoke to one of my professors who said, look, the jobs are in finance. You ought to just major in finance, gain some skills. There are a lot of jobs there. If you don't know what you're going to do, just do that. And so ultimately, that's what I decided to do. And that led me to my first job out of college, which ultimately built the foundation and allowed me to develop the skills that have propelled me throughout my entire career. When I was at that job, I reported to my eventual co-founder at CarLotz. I saw examples of people who I really admired, who I felt were way smarter than me, way more competent than me. And I really just wanted to get to that level. So how do I go do that? A lot of those folks had their MBAs. It's very typical in the finance world, investment banking and private equity in particular, for folks to have MBAs from top programs. And so I made that a specific goal of mine and worked really hard to make it happen. From there, I wanted to start a business, but I didn't have an idea. And frankly, I wasn't confident enough in my skill set. I had a great background in finance, some great analytical skills, but what other challenges might I face that I needed to prepare myself for when launching my business? And that's when I landed at this technology company in Raleigh and reported to the founder of that business, who was an extremely talented entrepreneur. He was a little bit eccentric. And so I had incredible stories. Every day I came home and told my wife, over the dinner table, something that happened that day. And I took pages and pages of notes, probably 15 pages of notes over the about year and a half that I was there, that I still go back to and access whenever I'm facing a problem in my current role. It's typically something that I remember seeing back when I was in Raleigh, and something that founder had faced. The notes that I had from those conversations have really helped kind of propel me and make sure that I'm making the right choices when I face problems in my own business.
Well, that stands out to me. So you had the presence of mind to take 15 or dozens of pages of notes at the time before you ever knew you were going to start a business someday?
Yes, this was the beauty of the relationship that I had with the founder of that business. When I interviewed with him, he asked me what my career aspirations were. And I shared with him openly that I wanted to be like him, that someday I wanted to start a company and I wanted to grow it and have the type of impact on the economy, on his employees, on the community that he was having. And he reacted positively to that and said he would do whatever he could to help me achieve that objective. If I could come in and work hard and do the things that he needed me to do, he would give me a seat at the table and let me watch the challenges that he faced. And he was extremely open and transparent in some of the issues that he was dealing with. And I had really a window into his psyche, into the emotional roller coaster that you go through as the owner of a business. And I think because we had that relationship, because he knew that was my objective and gave me all those opportunities, I felt compelled to make the most of that. And so taking those notes was kind of a tribute to that, but also I was learning so much and he was so talented. It was such a blessing. I felt like I cannot squander this opportunity. I have to make the most of it.
Well, we're always looking for those actionable tips for the audience. And I'm curious, are there any actionable tips? How would someone get that type of relationship? How would you even broach that subject? Do you think it was just luck? Was it that it just came up in conversation and you had the guts to mention it? Did you play this overtly? Talk me through how this even comes up, because that is not a normal relationship, as you well know, but it's so fascinating and it helped you personally so much in your career.
It was abnormal. So I have to chalk a lot of that up to luck. But at the same time, my willingness to be open with my goals, to be transparent with him about, hey, I'm likely not going to be at this company for the long haul. I'm here to learn. I'm here to add value, and I'm going to work extremely hard to be productive for you while I'm here. But my ultimate goal is to move on and do my own thing. I got extremely lucky that he was receptive to that and saw an opportunity to put me in a position where I could add some value for him at the time that he needed it, but at the same time support me in my goals and propel me, forward in my career. That aspect of it is extremely lucky. So a lot of this does come down to the individual that I worked for. But what I learned from that experience was that being open and honest and transparent in your goals and objectives can create tremendous value. When you publicize your goals, it's amazing how the world almost aligns around you to help you achieve it. And we've done that in my business with CarLotz. I share with my partners the things that I want to work on, the things that get me excited, the skills that I want to develop, the areas of the business that I want to grow and improve. When I share those with them and put them on the table, they are supportive of my efforts to do whatever they need to do to help me achieve those objectives. And I think as a result of that supportive relationship that we have with one another, we've taken our company to new heights. And I want to do the same thing for the people that report to me. I take that kind of mentoring relationship very seriously. And it's less about the skills that I have that I can impart to somebody else, but more about clearing the runway for them to achieve the objectives that they've set for themselves, professionally and personally.
I have chills down my spine on so many different levels with that entire thought process. One, because I see that mirrored with the relationship that Brad and I have with this particular business that we are working on. And also kind of that pay it forward mentality that you clearly have with the people that are helping you with your business.
And Will, my question is about your current company and how you foster that environment where people feel comfortable talking about it. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in our audience whose ears might have perked up when they heard you say that you encourage that in your own business. And You want people to be honest with where their goals are. And even if that means they might not be at CarLotz a few years from now. There are so many people who hesitate to speak up because they're so nervous about losing their job or offending their manager or the boss or something. How do you make that environment conducive to that?
I sit down frequently with the folks that report to me and discuss their goals. I do check-ins on a weekly basis to help them prioritize their workflow, not just to ensure that they're working on the things that I believe are most valuable to the company, but to ensure that they're not getting caught up in mind-numbing activities that ultimately frustrate them and cause them to leave. I want them working on activities that energize them, but it's also selfish. When we find something that lights our employees up, they are going to add value to the company in ways that we can't even imagine. So we always want to push them in the direction of activities that get them fired up and they're excited to work on.
And I think that speaks to the fact that nobody just wants to do busy work. Nobody wants to copy information from cell A5 to cell C27 2,000 times a day. That's just not going to be it. And I certainly get that as well. I want to come back to this double-edged sword. You had this mentor that had such a powerful impact on your life, and you were honest and upfront with them and let them know, hey, I want to come learn from you because I aspire to do this. But you're one of these unusual cases where you did actually take action on it and leave to form a startup. Let's talk about that conversation when you told him you were leaving.
That was the hardest professional conversation I've ever had. The owner had given me so many opportunities to learn and challenge myself, and I just didn't feel like I had given him equivalent value. I also respected his opinion, and I was super nervous he would pick apart the decision, thinking I wasn't ready to start my own business or criticizing the business model, really making me second guess this decision. But I had conviction in my choice. So after rehearsing the conversation probably 50 times, I realized I just needed to stop rehearsing my script and rip the Band-Aid off. So I went in and I told him. As soon as I shared the news, the way he treated me changed in a pretty remarkable way, almost like I had become a respected peer as opposed to an employee. He said, he's heard a lot of people say over the years that they're going to start a business, but very few people actually do it. So his level of respect for me really jumped up a few notches. So there was some initial shock there, but he ended up being totally supportive and ended up giving me lots of good advice for how to get this business off the ground.
What did he think of your business plan?
It's funny. One of the conversations I remember most was when I asked him if he wanted to see the business plan, which we had planned to use in talking with potential investors because we wanted to go out and raise a little bit of money to help us get the business off the ground. I will never forget, he told me he did not want to see it. He said to me, the only plan I guarantee with 100% certainty that you will not execute is the one that you've written. And I'm thinking to myself, you're crazy. I'm offended by this. We put a ton of work into this business plan. This is definitely how it's going to play out. But what he said was, what really matters is that you're solving a real problem. You're going to work hard to do it. And you just won't figure out the how until you start dealing with customers. So the business plan today is almost irrelevant to what your business is going to be tomorrow. And that has really turned out to be true. It's pretty easy to write a plan. I still encourage you to do it if you're thinking about starting a business because it forces the discipline of thinking through a lot of different scenarios and how you would kind of plan and design and launch and deal with setbacks. But dealing with live customers is like a punch in the face on how little you actually know. So you have to adapt quickly.
So I think it's time. I need to go ahead and set the stage for maybe people on the West Coast who haven't seen a CarLotz store yet. It really is blowing up and it is going nationwide. And you're probably going to be asking or looking for one after you hear this episode. But as of this point, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Will, CarLotz has 6 locations in Virginia, North Carolina, Florida. You're actually opening up your 7th location in Chicago. I mean, and this is truly a monster complex with like 500 cars on the floor. I mean, it is a CarMax size location, 110 employees. If there is a business that is truly at this inflection point, it is CarLotz. And when we roll out the model, I think it'll be obvious to people why it's catching on so quickly. But I don't want your input on where it is right now. What I really want to capture is those early days. And you can't just build a CarLotz, even a smaller one. That's not something that you can fund with your savings over the last 2 years. When you're talking about a business like this, you're talking about seed capital. Describe that process to us.
You're right. Our business does require a little bit of capital to grow. And when we first wrote the business plan, we actually set out to raise a significant round of investment capital because we wanted to build large locations similar to the size of what you might see at a CarMax with 500 plus cars, multiple service bays, full salaries for us and our team. The investors that we went to, which were largely angel investors and friends and family in the Richmond area, they were intrigued by the concept, but they just weren't sure people would actually sell their cars this way. And they weren't willing to take that big of a swing on an unproven concept with 3 individuals who had never run a business before. We all came from professional services backgrounds, and only one of us had auto industry experience. They said, "We like you guys. We're not going to write you a big check, though, but we will write you a small one. And if you can prove the concept on a small scale, then come back to us and we'll write you the big check then." So we went back to the drawing board. We scaled back the concept to focus on much smaller stores to see if the unit economics still worked. And more importantly, did some soul searching to determine if we were willing to take this plunge without paying ourselves a salary. And ultimately, we decided we can make it work. We started small. We raised a little bit of seed capital. And sure enough, when we saw success and did what we said we were going to do, our investors were there to back us with a bigger check when we wanted to expand the concept.
So, Will, I want to talk about the psychological aspect of this. You left this lucrative job in North Carolina. It sounds like your wife stayed there for a while. So, I mean, this is a big move to take this leap. And then you're trying to raise significant capital, and the investors basically say, it sounds good in theory, but you have to prove it. Was there a level of disappointment? You talked about this soul searching, like really talk us through, like, I want to humanize this moment because this is so important. I hope you can put yourself back in your shoes then and talk us through, like, what were you thinking? Was this an, oh my God, what did I do to my life type scenario? Or was it a, hey, we're smart guys, we can figure this out? Really talk us through that.
It was more the former, an oh my God, what did I do with my life situation. We basically got punched in the gut when we went out to investors to raise the money. And we had to think hard about, could we make this work on a smaller scale? In hindsight, it was actually a blessing in disguise, because when you start on a much smaller scale and you don't have a huge bank account backing every decision that you make, you have to be a lot more thoughtful about getting all the little fine details right out of the gate. So we put pen to paper, we ran all the numbers, we went through lots of upside and downside scenarios, really trimmed back the expenses and the investments that we were going to make in the store, and kind of what could we do on a bare bones basis to prove that this concept actually works and people would actually sell their cars on consignment. Ultimately, we got to the truth of the matter, which was that people would sell their cars on consignment. And that then enabled us to figure out, okay, well, what are the things that really matter to our customers so that we can then focus on those as we build out this business.
Okay, now we have spent a lot of time talking about, how you got here and how the investors kind of warmed to the idea. And now we're really talking about the concept. And I think people at some level may know what consignment means. And maybe you can think of a consignment store where you can purchase clothing or some other article. But I don't think anybody is familiar with the idea of consignment when it comes to cars. And this is interesting because this is ultimately your challenge. How do you retrain people to think about this idea? And I guess really you had to explain this not just to the outside world, but at some point, I think you were even having to beg and plead with your friends and family to consider this idea. That's how foreign it is.
Yeah. So begging and pleading our friends and family to consign cars is not an exaggeration at all. That's exactly what happened. But let me just step back and give you a quick overview on the business. The whole reason we started CarLotz was that we saw a problem in the market that many people, ourselves included, were frustrated by the process of selling a used car. So you typically have two options. You can trade it in at a traditional dealership, but that nets a wholesale price, which is often too low for most people. Or you can sell it yourself, which is a time-consuming hassle that can involve uncomfortable negotiations with strangers, something that a lot of people just don't have an appetite for. So CarLotz kind of fills that gap. We're a consignment store for cars that helps sellers get what their car is worth without the hassles of the sale by owner market. For a flat fee, we'll help you pick a price, get it inspected, cleaned, photographed, listed on major auto buying websites, manage all the buyer inquiries and test drives, do the DMV paperwork, and ultimately cut the seller a check when the car sells. So in the early days, I really have some of the most fond and vivid memories, even though it was an extreme challenge to explain the concept and to get cars on our lot. Fortunately, our friends and family decided not to let us drown, and we got our first maybe 10 to 15 cars on the lot, and we were ready to roll. We invited friends to come by as if they were real customers so that we could practice our sales pitch and explain how our service worked. And that role playing is actually a hallmark of our training for new employees today. So that really kind of goes back to the early days of the founders kind of honing that pitch. And you know how many of your blogger guests talk about how looking back, they realize how awful their first few articles were? Well, that's exactly how we felt about CarLotz. And those early attempts at explaining the benefits of car consignment and explaining the business model are really making me cringe.
All right, we got to go. I want some examples. Can you give us a few stories from those early days?
Yes. So I clearly remember we got our first 15 cars and thinking just how awesome it was. And then it dawned on me, oh my gosh, now we actually have to sell these. So we listed the cars on AutoTrader and cars.com, and lo and behold, buyers start showing up. Well, I literally did not know how to sell a car, like what paperwork to do, what taxes to collect, where the buyers should sign. My first sale, I was panicking, and I didn't want to let on to the customer that I had no idea what I was doing. So I threw a few hand signals to my business partner, who fortunately had dealership experience, knew what to do, and calmly stepped in to save me from drowning in what was basically my own stupidity. So, a couple more. I mean, we didn't even have our own internet connection when buyers started showing up. So after negotiating a deal for a purchase, we had to invite the customer to the back corner of the building where our laptops could steal Wi-Fi from the Volvo dealer next door, just so we could print the paperwork. I mean, it's kind of pathetic thinking back on it, but here's a particularly fun one. I remember one of the first cars we sold was low on gas, apparently extremely low. We were so proud watching the buyer pull out of our lot, only for that excitement to turn to horror as we witnessed him slowly guide the car to the grass bank on the right, only 25 yards down the road. He had run out of gas.
I'm in tears.
Yeah. Needless to say, we quickly realized we needed a pre-sale checklist to ensure, we didn't forget things like whether the car has gas.
Thank you so much for being willing to share those, what must be embarrassing, but for everybody else, awesome stories. And it really is cool. And that is the story of the entrepreneur. You do what needs to be done, and you don't let your lack of experience hold you back. Go get some experience. So now you're a few years into this, but I'm sure looking back to those early days, you could say there were some valuable lessons that you learned, like that pre-checklist that you talked about, that in my mind would have value for someone that is not in the car industry. And I'm curious, if you could pull out those actionable takeaways, what would you want to communicate to somebody?
In hindsight, it was pretty clear, based on some of those embarrassing stories, that we were not ready for live action. But at the same time, just opening our doors was probably the best decision we ever made. Interacting with real customers gave us valuable learning moments early on about what our customers really valued and the obstacles that we'd face as business owners. And because we were live, we had to quickly fix problems, sometimes on the fly, in front of the customer. If we hadn't experienced those early failures, I don't know that we would have realized how important the back end details like paperwork can be to creating a positive guest experience. And those are now hallmarks of our service. So as a takeaway for anybody else out there who is considering starting a new venture, whether it's a business, a side hustle, a blog, a podcast, don't wait for perfection. Just get something out there and iterate on it. If you're not embarrassed by the first iteration, you're probably launching too late. And if you don't launch at all, you are robbing yourself of an opportunity to see how good you can be.
What you just said, I just want to highlight the power of that point. If you're not embarrassed by the first iteration, you're launching too late. I hope that everyone grabbed that and is getting rid of those limiting beliefs that is keeping them from just taking action. So incredibly powerful. And thank you for sharing.
And Will, I kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper into some of these inflection points and more importantly, how you're on the lookout for them and how you guys know. So you set up this business plan, and now obviously the current business model is as far from that as possible as you're describing it. But there's a process to get from here to there. And you're a couple of HBS graduates, you're used to making these business plans and having plans and goals and et cetera, and just kind of operating on them. But as a business owner, you need to be on the lookout for new information. And, oh, wow, you mean that's the path forward? Or, wow, our employee brought us this. This is a brilliant idea. How do you stay open to new ideas while also trying to execute a plan? How are you on the lookout and open-minded enough to those new ideas?
Frankly, we have to be open-minded and open to new ideas, or our business will not succeed. We are in a highly competitive industry. Consignment is not an old concept. Consignment for cars maybe is a new concept. The auto industry has been around for a long, long time. There are deeply entrenched competitors. We're stepping into the lion's den and trying to do something a little bit different, but have ambitions to build a big business. And so doing something different, trying new ideas, just getting a lot of good shots on goal, it's in our DNA, and we try to pass that along to our employees. I like to tell everybody that I interview, if you have a good idea, if you see a process that we could improve based on your prior experience, please bring it up, please share it, and we will test it on a small scale. And if it works, we'll apply it to the whole company. There is literally no pride of authorship. This whole business could look completely different 2 years from now, 5 years from now, than it does today. And I would be completely okay with that.
As you were talking about that, something that came to my mind was a concept that you introduced, frankly, to me. I don't know if it's a Will Boland original, but certainly it's a powerful strategy that I think everybody should consider where it fits in their own personal ecosystem and business plan. And that is the pufferfish strategy. I would love for you to introduce it to our audience and then explain how you've used it for your business.
Absolutely. So early on, we had some great success with PR on a national level. We didn't even have internet, yet we were getting mentioned in Inc. magazine and the New York Times. My co-founder was being interviewed on Fox Business. And this is something I'm convinced that any startup business can do, probably any blogger can do, using the pufferfish strategy, as Jonathan mentioned, which is where you puff yourself up to make yourself seem bigger and more important than you really are. So the way that worked at CarLotz was in the early days, we created a professional looking one-pager on the business, along with a professional headshot and really compelling bio on my co-founder, Michael. And I would search major news outlets for journalists that had covered the auto industry. And I also subscribed to a service called HARO, which is short for Help a Reporter Out, that would notify me when a journalist was looking for an auto industry expert to help supplement their story. I would then craft an email pitch as if I were the company's dedicated PR person. Keep in mind, we didn't have any employees at the time. I would pitch Michael as the CEO of an innovative company disrupting the auto business and how he had an interesting take on a particular topic that I felt would be helpful to the journalist readers or viewers. And journalists are always looking for great quotes to supplement their stories. but they move super quickly. So we had to have a really tight pitch that shows that we were credible. We got a couple early hits, and as soon as we did, I would update Michael's bio along with our website with things like as featured in the New York Times and the Atlantic. I would include a logo of the publication. We'd link to the article on our website. And over time, we've found that national PR is great. Really, it's local PR that's more effective at actually driving customer traffic. But in the early days, that national PR can really help you establish credibility with prospective customers, with business partners, and even employees. So it was a critical aspect of those early days for us.
And also, would you say that the national exposure helps you get more of the local exposure?
100%. When you can cite that your business is being featured in places like the New York Times, the local media outlets are much more likely to cover you. And we've seen that. I mean, we've been fortunate to get lots of great local press and develop really good relationships with our local newspaper and some of the other media outlets. But those early national wins really kind of put us on the map for even the local folks.
So the first time that your business partner made it on the national TV circuit, did you guys watch it online with your stolen Wi-Fi?
Thanks for bringing that up again. But what we actually did at the time, we didn't have cable. And so we had to close the store. We put a note on the window that said, "We will be back in 30 minutes. We drove up the street to a restaurant, got lunch, and had them change the channel from whatever sports game was on to watch Mike on TV. It was pretty hysterical.
That's amazing. Let's go ahead and bring this back and talk a little bit about, building a business in the context of the financial independence community, because you're kind of on both of these lines. And I would say that your worldview with entrepreneurship and your perspective on financial independence and the power that that affords you have really complemented each other. And I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, starting a business and pursuing FI are highly complementary in my mind. They're both choices that are largely about controlling your destiny and not being beholden to a particular location, job function, or employer because you need the income. And what I find so cool about starting a business is that even though I'm not at FI, I can still wake up every day excited to get to work. I can work on any area of the company that interests me. So there's tons of variety. I mean, I don't know any normal job where I'd be responsible for the design and copy of our website, to the company's benefits plan, to doing financial planning and analysis. Those are all things that I enjoy doing that create value for the company. And I'm in a position to make the choice to do them. So with any job, there are going to be activities that you dread. I certainly feel that way on occasion. But as a business owner, if I find those dreadful activities stacking up too frequently, I have the ability to make a change. I routinely review my to-do list with a critical eye, and I make decisions on whether I can delegate, delay, or delete tasks that are making me unhappy or preventing me from accomplishing my most important goals.
Well, in terms of being a business owner and what's potentially a very large business, but being in the FI community, do you have a partnership agreement or an understanding with your partners of what each of your roles are going to look like in years to come? Like, what if there are just a few aspects of your job that you really love and really add value to the company, and you just simply don't want to do everything else? You want to delegate. At that point, who knows? It might be a Fortune 500 company. And as one of the founders, you just don't want to be chained to your desk X number of hours a week. Is that something that you've overtly talked through with your co-founders?
We have. And I think that's been a crucial part of why our partnership has been successful. I remember going back to even the very early days before we opened our store. We were working out of an investor's office, putting my business plan together, putting our website design together, really just lining everything up that we needed to do to get this business off the ground. And we were working long hours. We were around a conference room table, spending a lot of time together. And you learn about each individual's tics and the way they work. Even though I had prior experience with one of my partners, I really didn't know our third co-founder all that well, outside of a handful of conference calls that we would do on Sunday nights as we were putting the business plan together. We decided to take an afternoon. We actually went to my parents' house. That's where I was living. We had some leftover barbecue that my dad made, and we sat around my parents' picnic table and basically had an airing of the grievances where we would, from each of them and them to me, go through things that we liked and things that we didn't like about way the working relationship was going. And that was really tough because at first you take everything personally and you want to get defensive. But once you have that breakthrough and you realize, hey, this feedback, it's not criticism, it's constructive, it's coming from a good place. If we do it respectfully and we want this partnership to work, we need to be able to share the challenges that we're facing personally, professionally, or even with each other. And so we've had those check-in moments periodically over the years. We meet once a week for breakfast. We usually do a quarterly offsite where we have a little bit more time to kind of go through these issues. Hey, are we aligned on what we want to achieve for this business? Are you working on things that energize you? Is there anything else that you want to be doing here that you're not doing? And how can we make that happen? I feel so lucky that my partners are supportive of that, and I'm certainly supportive of that for them. And I think that's what's ultimately led us to have such a strong partnership even 7 years into this business.
I'm always very interested in the math, and I realize that the math doesn't always account for everything. But if you look at this contrast, you're 7 years into this journey, and who knows where this takes you into the future. But if we're looking at life as a snapshot, where you are now, I'm curious, have you caught up to where you would have been if you had just stayed in investment services? Financially, I guess?
Financially, I have not caught up to where I would have been, but I think from a life resume perspective, I'm way ahead of where I would have been. And the way I like to think about it, it's really easy. I mean, I have former colleagues and friends from business school, who have gone on to hedge fund careers and investment banking careers and made ungodly amounts of money. And it's very easy for me to look at the outcome of that and say, gosh, I wish I were there. But the reality is I'd have to go live that life to get there. And that's not the life that I want to live. I'm living the life that I want to live. I'm busier than I've ever been, but it's good busy because I'm working largely on activities that energize me. So even though I'm working long hours and I always have the business on my mind, I have complete control over my schedule. So I can always make room for priorities outside of work. Since starting the business, I've gotten really into running. I've completed 7 marathons. I've been able to make time for that training. My wife and I have had 2 children. And while I'm certainly not on Brad Barrett's level of spending time with my kids, something to aspire to, I have not missed a single important event in their lives because of a work obligation. So having a business and living life on my terms, I've been able to design the life that I want to live. And I just don't think, even if I'm behind where I would have been from a financial perspective, had I stayed in the finance career, I'm way ahead from a life design perspective.
Yeah, that's amazing, Will. And it's so important, especially when you have young kids, to be able to spend that time and have that life design, as you say. So I absolutely love that. One question that comes to mind, because I've had people ask me personally this before, is do you consider your equity in the company as part of your net worth, or is that just such a far off nebulous thing of ever selling it or it being at some market value? Or do you just consider your actual today, this is my net worth in my various accounts? Has that ever crossed your mind even?
I've definitely thought about that. I personally do not include the equity that I have in my business as part of my net worth. I am exclusively focused on building this company in a way that I believe will ultimately add value for the business and for our investors over time. That could mean that in a few years, we sell the company or we're able to take distributions from the company in a way that will allow me to dramatically catch up from a FI perspective and dramatically increase my net worth. But I don't like to think about it that way because I want to make decisions from a business perspective for the long haul versus thinking about what's the impact on my personal financial situation. And actually compartmentalizing the two has helped me manage my stress levels immensely. I used to think that my net worth, my ability to reach financial independence was tied exclusively to making this business a financial home run. Once I stumbled on the FI community and I realized that I could, just through the income and through my wife's income and through some simple personal finance tenets, ultimately achieve some base level of FI objectives, that it kind of de-stressed the whole idea that I had to make this business a success. And in a way, it has made me a better manager. It has enabled me to take or be willing to take more risks for the business, because I know that even in a downside scenario, if I structure my life and my finances properly, my family is still going to be okay from a financial perspective.
That's amazing. That actually exactly mirrors my own take on just finances in general. And then also, obviously, we've put so much into Choose FI. That's exactly the way that I feel about it. My wife came to me and she said, what if people just stop listening in 5 years or 10 years? Or what if nobody cares about this stuff in a year or two? And I said, well, we're still on our path. You know, like this isn't something that needs to last forever. It doesn't need to be a home run because the math is just the math. And I find it de-stresses me at a very personal level. So I totally get that and appreciate it. Well, this has been such a treat to get a chance to feature your story. And I knew it was awesome, but I don't think I knew how awesome it was. And I just appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. Now, normally on most podcasts, that would be the end of the episode. But on this show, we would love to give you the opportunity to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
I couldn't be more ready.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Will, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
I'm going to go with Sivers.org. Derek Sivers, who I actually learned about through one of Brad's favorites, the Tim Ferriss podcast, wrote one of my favorite books on entrepreneurship called Anything You Want, which tells the story of his creating, growing, and selling his business, and then choosing to essentially give it all away and move to New Zealand to focus on his family and his creative pursuits. He's not explicitly FI, but he hasn't worked for money in over 10 years since selling his business and has an uncommon approach to living on his own terms that I think resonates really well with the FI community.
I have never heard of his blog, but I'm fascinated and will absolutely check it out. Question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this can be one that you wrote if you have something on CarLotz.com, or it could be somebody else's.
I have no written content to speak to on CarLotz.com. As interested as I'm sure you guys would be in the community on a used car article, but Wait But Why has been mentioned as a favorite by a few guests, and for good reason. There are a ton of great posts there, but the one that really blew my mind was called The Tail End. The author lays out a 90-year life in units of specific activities. So, for example, if you're 30, you have 60 summers left. The stunner for me was when he started talking about his parents, who he sees about 10 total days a year. So assuming they live 30 more years, he has only 300 days left with them. And he then compares that to the collective amount of time he spent with them in his life. And given that most of that was pre-college while he was living at home, he estimates that of the 100% of the time he has to spend with his parents during their lifetime, he only has about 5% left, which is totally unacceptable. And it really just put into perspective for me how important it is to prioritize living near and spending time with the people you love and making the most of those precious moments.
Yeah, Will, that was beautiful. And I had a sense when you were describing Wait But Why that you were going to go for that article, because that had a huge impact on me as well. Also, as a parent myself, right? My older daughter is 10 years old now. And when you consider that you spent 90+% of your time with your kids by the time they're 18, I've spent over 40% of my time in her entire life together already. That's pretty sobering. So it makes you, while you could look at the negative, it makes you look at the positive of hey, let's really get the most out of this time. And I think that's the takeaway.
Totally.
All right. Well, question number 3, your favorite life hack.
Well, this year, it's got to be the public library because my business partner and I are doing a 100 book challenge. So at $20 a pop, that membership is going to save me about $2,000. But all time, my favorite life hack, without question, is running, which is something I picked up just after we started the business as a way to stay healthy and manage the stress of starting a new company. It's definitely a gateway habit for me because it leads to so many other healthy activities. And I think in a lot of respects, it's a lot like starting a business and pursuing FI because it requires consistency and commitment. And you have to regularly make choices that contribute to, not detract from, achieving your goal. So if I want to run a personal best marathon, I have to make good choices like eating healthy and getting ample sleep, and like Brad, doing mobility exercises at night in front of the TV and so on. And so I think for me, one way of knowing that my goals have strong personal meaning, whether that's running or FI or for my business, is that those types of decisions were super hard at first, but have over time become easy for me because I crave the results so intensely that the work required to get there becomes almost irrelevant.
Yeah, I completely hear you, Will. To me, finding these pursuits you can just work at, they might take decades to get to where you ultimately want to be. Or I know you're a fantastic marathoner, but I'm sure you have goals that you want to get there. And that might mean, like you said, mobilizing at night for, who knows, an hour or two every single night. I mean, that's practically what I do because I'm quickly coming up on 40 here, and I don't want to be that old, immobile dad and someday grandpa. Right?
Brad, don't call it 40. Call it the 10th anniversary of your 30th birthday.
Nice.
All right. Let's circle back, man. Will, question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
All right. You ready for a doozy? This is a major violation of FI principles, a violation, if you will. When I was
this episode is the gift that keeps on giving.
When I was in business school, I got a summer internship at a family investment office where my job was to meet with prospective hedge fund managers that the family was considering investing in. And this was in 2008. So in meetings with the portfolio managers, we kept hearing how they saw doom and gloom ahead. They were aggressively shorting stocks tied to the housing market. The world is going to end, et cetera, et cetera. And I just got totally spooked. I took my entire stock portfolio, including all retirement accounts, to 100% cash. So lo and behold, a couple months later, Lehman Brothers goes belly up and the market tanks. Obviously, being in cash, I avoided the entire crash. And I was thinking to myself, man, I am a stock market genius. Well, that's when things get bad. I proceeded to get busy at school, finding a job, getting married, starting a company, having children, and I never got back into the stock market. I missed the whole crash, but also the whole recovery and subsequent bull market for the next 8 years until I discovered FI and realized my stupidity. So I definitely take Vicki Robbins' advice in Your Money, Your Life to heart, and I don't beat myself up too badly over my past mistakes, but it's still pretty humbling to admit that had I never moved to cash in 2008, I would be at FI today.
It reminds me of something that I've heard multiple times, and that's when you're timing the market, you don't have to be right just once. You have to get it right twice. And certainly your story highlights that.
Well, question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
Well, given my previous story, my advice to my younger self, at least when it comes to investing, would be don't try to be smart, just try not to be stupid. So in hindsight, I wish I had known that I should just stick to the basics and not make stupid moves like trying to time the market. Just by focusing on a high savings rate, picking any reasonable portfolio, and staying invested, time in the market alone would have had the biggest impact on my portfolio.
Yeah, I think that pairs really well with the other question. All right, now we do have a bonus question for you. We spend a lot of our show talking about things that you shouldn't buy or that you should avoid buying, cutting waste. But in reality, all of us do make purchases based on value. And the question is, if you look back over the last 12 months, what is one purchase that you made that has brought the most value to your life?
So I love listening to audiobooks and podcasts on my runs, but having buds in your ears can get a little dangerous when you're running outside on busy streets because you're totally in the zone and you're not as attuned to what's going on around you. So I recently purchased a set of bone induction headphones by a company called Trex Titanium, or that's the model, I think. They sit behind or, just kind of on the front of your ear, not over them or in them. So you can hear all the ambient noise and traffic that's around you. And the sound quality is shockingly good, but more importantly, they're much safer than traditional earbuds.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Well, I've never heard of them. How much do they cost roughly? Do you have any recollection?
They are not super cheap. They are about $130, but I use them every day. So for me, it's totally worth it.
That is very cool. And I think I had heard of them before. I think they actually make a pair for swimmers because they work through vibration, I believe. Those are actually a way that you can listen to music under the water. I imagine Michael Phelps doing his 45 miles a day and having his bone induction gear on. Oh, man. Will, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. This has been such a treat.
Guys, thanks so much for having me. It's been a ton of fun. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Brad, I kind of started this episode with the hook about what this episode was not about, but I think this is what a case study in Design Your Future actually looks like. And I love that he was willing to not only show you the actionable steps to how he got where he was and why CarLotz is where it is, but also expose what is potentially embarrassing stories, behind the scenes on this. There was a vulnerability in this episode, which is so rare and so endearing. And I'm grateful to Will for being willing to go there.
Yeah, I agree. It's so interesting to hear those beginning stories of stealing Wi-Fi from the Volvo dealership next door or the car literally running out of gas 20 yards down the road. But those are the things they'll look back on when they are a Fortune 500 company someday. And I mean, Will's story is incredible. I mean, he took a big chance. This guy had the perfect path to be a multimillionaire, right? He's a Harvard Business School graduate. He's in investment banking, private equity. He worked for a home office. I mean, these are the careers that people aspire to generally in the regular population. And he basically said, no, I want to create my own business. It's doing extraordinarily well and continues to grow significantly. It's been great getting to know Will personally here in Richmond, and we're just excited to see where he goes from here.
If you got value from today's episode, if you've been getting value from the episodes up to this point, just take 1 second and press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on, and just let the providers know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional content. If you want to support us and what we're doing here at Choose FI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.